Hello. In the Crown of Aragon, 639 years ago, it was May 31st, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. If you're looking at the image of today's document on the web page that is on the website that is linked to in the show notes, if you don't know about that, definitely check it out. I think it makes the podcast a whole lot more interesting or a whole lot less boring, depending on your starting point for that. So anyway, if you're looking at the document for today, you'll probably recognize it because not too long ago, on May 25th, we looked at this same folio. It's a little weird because there is a lot of empty space at the top of the page. Then you can kind of make out a watermark in the middle. And the first part of this register was devoted to a big old list of things that Violant had sent to the Pope way earlier in the year. And then for some reason they decided to pick it up again at this moment at the end of May. The first letter is the one that is really entertaining to talk about. It's when Violant first contacts Jordi de Sobra in Valencia about a book of magic curses, or maybe more accurately, a book about how to undo a curse. So that one, if you haven't listened to that episode, super entertaining, highly recommend. This other letter is from a few days later, today, May 31st, kind of on a different topic. I can't quite figure out exactly what is going on here because it's so short, today's document, and it is definitely punishing somebody, but it's not clear why. It's left very vague. So let's talk about the apparatus of this document. We have La Reina at the top, and then we have an addressee line. We actually have two addressee lines. We have the lieutenant or locum tenente, the lieutenant governor of Majorca. And then also we have below that a note saying similis fuit, as the similar was made for the governor of Majorca. Not quite sure why the lieutenant governor comes before the governor. It seems to me like logically you would put the person with the higher authority first. Do not know. The probata is per de besant, and we have here a confusing probata because it seems like it is not from the queen herself, but from the treasurer. So, yeah, factum ad. And then we have REL. Yep, not quite sure what that stands for in this probata, but then at the very end, it's a very clear Latin for treasurer there. So that expands out to tesorario, I think. And then, weirdly, there's a probata at the bottom. What is that there for? That is an odd duck right there on that page because it says idem probata. Maybe it's the probata for the similis fuit facta, that is not something they usually feel is necessary to do, to put a probata on the note that a similar one was sent out to somebody else. So that is weird. And Père de Besant, he is pretty much well established at this point as a scribe in the chancery, so it's not like some newbie doing something weird here. This is somebody that has a lot of experience, so that is puzzling, that little idem probata. But basically what you usually see that with is if there's one document and then the next document is the exact same probata, and they'll just put that there as a shorthand to say, just look at the probata from the document above. But it's usually after like a full document, not after just a little addressee line like this. All right, so we have something related to money, and the document starts out per als alguns raons les quals así no tal explicar, which is hilarious. Like, for reasons that we don't need to explain. And then we have the king has commanded. So why isn't it coming from the king's treasurer? So I think it is interesting. I think we've got another document that supports the theory of a high degree of co-rule going on between Joan and Violant, when you have the king has commanded this thing, but it's coming from the queen, right? So what has the king commanded? That all of the goods, like each and all, tots et singles, each and all of the goods of Berenguer de Tornamira are to be inventoried and sequestered, and you have to make sure that none of them are hidden or diminished. And then this other stuff in this short document all amounts to, we are sending our porter, who is, I think, Per Correger, Torreger, maybe. It's at the end of line 3, that surname. And he's going to make sure that you've done it. And so if you don't give it your utmost diligence, your soberana diligencia, then we're going to be mad. We're going to think of you as having been neglectful, and it'll impute your character, so you better do a good job. And that's all there is. That's all there is to it. So a little bit of research, one kind of quick Google search for Berenguer de Tornamira resulted in an article from a scholar who's done some excellent work on the period that is just before Joan's reign. So Diana Pelez Flores has done some excellent work on the women of the reign of Per the Ceremonious, so his wife, his daughter. There's an article that puts a lot of focus onto Joan's younger sister, Leonor, who ends up marrying the King of Castile, who's been a correspondent of Joan and Violant in a lot of the documents we've looked at on the podcast. So remember that whenever we see a letter from Joan or Violant to the King of Castile, Joan's sister is there in the house with the King of Castile. I mean, maybe not always, but, in theory, always there. So Berenguer de Tornamira was a chamberlain for Leonor and actually accompanied her in 1375 when she journeyed from Barcelona to Castile. Not quite sure what city in Castile that would have been, and journeyed there for the purpose of marrying Juan I of Castile. Berenguer de Tornamira, before that, had been a very important part of the conquest of Majorca. You could maybe say the reconquest of Majorca. Anyway, the conquering of Majorca that happened during the reign of Per the Ceremonious. I think that was like the 1360s. Yeah, my knowledge of that period is not as solid as it could be. But anyway, he was a big deal in Majorca. And then he had a stint, which I found interesting. There's just this one paragraph in this article by Diana Pelez Flores that I'll cite in the page for today's episode, in which there's a footnote to an article by Maria Teresa Ferrer y Mayol about the relations between the North African states and the Crown of Aragon around this time. And Diana Pelaz Flores notes from there another connection regarding Berenguer de Tornamira, which is that he was at one point an ambassador to the Sultan of Morocco. So this is a guy who had a lot of status and did a lot of big jobs in the state bureaucracy during the reign of Per the Ceremonious, and something has happened where he is now being punished. And so I would really like to know. I did a little search in my OpenClaw pipeline generated database of all the stuff that was automatically text recognized by that process. Nothing came up for Tornamira, so I'll just have to just keep looking around, try to figure out the answer to that mystery of what did he do that was so bad. And maybe he's caught up in the whole Sibylla de Fortia stuff, and Violant is possibly thinking that he had a role in conspiring against Joan. I don't know. And that seems to be the thing that really gets people in trouble at this moment in the reign. But, people are always getting into trouble doing things, so yeah, we'll just keep an eye out for this. I really would like to know how this person who seems to be so highly esteemed, and maybe it was his loyalty to Joan's father that made him act against Joan in these first months of the reign. I don't know. It's all a big question. So that's all I have about the document dated May 31st in this register. But you might remember a little while ago, I was talking about another document dated May 31st that's not in the registers of Joan and Violant in the archive of the Crown of Aragon. This other document came up in the context of the episode about Berenguer Moret in Pisa. And as I was reading an article by the historian Victor Hurtado, I came across in that article another document footnoted there that says there was a letter sent to Berenguer Moret dated May 31st. And in that letter, it's like from another merchant in Barcelona, that person says to Berenguer Moret that Joan is not expected to recover from his illness. That basically the word on the street is that the king is really about to die. So that is really dramatically different from the stuff that we're looking at in these registers, right? So the rumor mill is just really active. And I was hoping that I could get a digitized copy of that document in time for today's episode. But even though I did get a very nice reply from the archive of the Cathedral of Barcelona, they have not yet had the time to scan it. I think there's a lot of other requests ahead of mine, and so I have not been able to see that actual document yet, just the summary of it in the article by Hurtado. So once I do get that digitized copy, then I'll be able to say more about it, and I'll add that information to the webpage for today's episode. So stay tuned, in a sense, on the webpage for today's episode. Hopefully, by the end of this coming week, I'll have received that and can tell you more about it. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, and how could you not, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.